Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your KidLit Loving host, inviting you back to another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. This week, I'm talking with Malia Maunakea. Malia is the author of the middle grade fiction series, Lay and the Legends, starting with book 1, Lay and the Fire Goddess, a book that earned a Kirkus starred review and an Amazon Best Book of the Month label. Today, she's here to talk about Lay and the Invisible Island, the sequel to Lay and the Fire Goddess, released just a couple of months ago. There's Hawaiian mythology. There is interesting and suspenseful plots. There are deeper themes of friendship, family, culture, identity. I got lost in both of the stories, and I cannot wait to talk about them with her. So, Malia, welcome to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I loved both of these novels. I gave you a little sneak peek before we hit record, but I just felt so transported and so lost in the culture and the mythology that I was learning and the beautiful language. I just can't wait to talk to you about both of the books. We'll give a little preview of the first one so that the second one makes sense. But before we get there, of course, I want you to talk about you. So I'm hoping you'll introduce yourself to listeners and tell us a little bit about your journey to writing children's literature.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Malia. I am currently in Colorado. Ooh, I'm gonna do that again, actually. Aloha, o Malia Maunakea ko uinoa, no hoao ma Colorado a ka no hilo mai au. That is how to say it in Hawaii and how I usually start off my school visits when trying to bring a little bit of Olelo Hawaii and the Hawaiian language into classrooms. Uh, Basically, I live in Colorado now, but I'm from Hilo on Hawaii Island and actually also from Honolulu. I went to a private school founded by a princess in Honolulu starting in 7th grade through high school and then moved to Colorado for college and have been here ever since. I live with my husband, my 2 teenagers who are both gonna be in high school this year,
Mhm.
and rescue mutt. We enjoy backpacking and doing a lot of outdoorsy things, and I got into writing because my son was a really avid reader and loved all the Percy Jackson, Rick Riordan stories, and I would try to let him know that we have our own legends and cultural tales and gods and goddesses, and he didn't really want to listen to me. So I thought maybe if I could get the the stories written in a way that would capture his imagination like Rick Riordan and maybe get him on a book on a shelf next to Rick Riordan, then he might be interested in reading them. So that was my goal.
Oh, I love that. First, I love the beauty of hearing you speak. That was beautiful at the opening because what you imagine it might be in your head as a reader may or may not be on the mark. So I love that you started that way. And I love also how this book series came to be. So many authors, when they come on here, talk about something in their life that sparked the book. And a lot of times it is their own children. And I love hearing about those. And mom for the win. You did it. And it is on the shelf. And hopefully he feels a little spark of pride, next to, I did that. I'm the reason
Right?
mom did that.
Yeah. He still hasn't read them because he's stubborn like that. He tried, but then he was like, "Mom, I already know this stuff." I was like, "That's fair. I have been talking about it every night at the dinner table for the past couple of years." So, okay.
True. True. Yes. And as a mom with teenagers as well, mine are a little bit older than you. I have one more left in high school. Um, when it's mom doing cool things, it just isn't as cool when it's
No, not at all.
and I love that's how it got started. There's just always something special, I think, of knowing that backstory, that spark of where it came to be. And I think it's clear once you're reading your books, you can see how much it is rooted in who you are and where you're from and the stories and the beautiful culture. Oh, I just love knowing that that was sparked with something between you and your son. Oh, I love it. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the books that he hasn't read yet, because I have, and I hope that listeners will want to as well. But it is, even though we're talking about your newest book today, Lay in the Invisible Island, we do need to talk just a little bit about the first one, I think, to give it a little bit of a context. So, can you tell us just a little bit of what Lay and the Fire Goddess is about, which is the first book really that kicks this off?
Sure. So, Anna is the main character, and she's a 12-year-old girl who lives primarily in Colorado now because that's where I live and where my kids are being brought up, and I wanted to talk about what I know, right? She goes back to Hawaii for 3 weeks every summer to spend time with her tutu, her grandma, and her grandma wants to teach her about their culture, her family history, and all of that. Anna really doesn't want to just sit and listen to her tutu all summer. She would much rather have a touristy, fun, adventurous vacation that she could go back to Colorado, back to school, and brag to her friends about and show them the pictures and be like interesting. But that doesn't go over well when she asks her tutu. So they get into a little bit of a fight. Anna tries to explain to her best friend in Hawaii what it is she wants, and her best friend ends up taking her grandma's side, which upsets Anna even more. So she ends up defying a goddess to prove that the goddess doesn't exist. And that backfires on her because then a giant hawk comes down and kidnaps her best friend, and Anna has to go on an adventure to rescue him and realizes along the way that maybe some of Tutu's stories are in fact true.
Yeah. I loved the opening of book one because at first it reads like a typical kids' summer vacation. Oh, I want it to be more fun than I think it's going to be. I want to have a story to tell my friends, but I'm not going to get it. And then, bam, that very event happens. And that's when I went, okay, so this is not that kind of book after all. And we are going to have a lot more adventure than I think.
Yes, yes, much more.
Yeah. And that hooks readers instantly. You have such a beautiful way of painting the scene of what's going on, whether it's the realities of the scene or the mythology of the scene. It's immersive. Like I really felt like as I was reading it that if I just kind of blinked and looked around, I'd be a little surprised that I'm still sitting at home on my boring couch with nothing going on. And I want to highlight before we talk about the new book, the covers. And I mentioned this to you before we recorded. I think the covers, even though there are no pictures in the book, the covers are just so bright and colorful and beautiful and actionable that as a reader, you look at that cover, you jump into your story and you literally do feel transported.
So KAA Illustration are the illustration team that designed the covers, and they are magicians who can bring like my brain visions to life. The They did such a fabulous job working with the team at Penguin, and they coordinated on making sure on book 1 all of the plants that are shown on the cover are identifiable and are native to Hawaii. So I'm able to, in school visits and talks and whatever, go through and kind of point out all of the Hawaiian plants and animals that are shown on the cover. And that's exactly what I wanted to be able to do, like have it be a teachable moment from the get go, because there just aren't that many books about Hawaii in this middle grade space, so I wanted it to be crystal clear looking at it that that is where we are in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this cover for the second book, which we'll get to, Lay in the Invisible Island. I love the colorfulness of it. And now that I've read it, because I one of the things I loved was the rainbow that stretches across the top. And then when you get to reading, you're like, oh, there's the rainbow. One of my favorite parts. There it is. And they're beautiful. And listeners, I know you can't see them, but you need to Google this title. You need to click the link in the show notes and see the cover because it is just so inviting that I know we don't like to judge books by their cover, but I can see kids looking at this cover and needing to read it.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
can judge these, that's
Yeah.
fine. They're very judgeable. And I really want you to go, like, into a bookstore and hold The Invisible Island, because it's when you open it and see where that rainbow goes that you get an idea of what's happening. So you gotta be able to see the full spread from the front to the back.
Yes. And I'll be honest, when I first got it, I didn't. I was just looking at the front. And then
Yeah.
it wasn't until later I had kind of flipped the book over and I went, "Oh, wait a minute."
Yeah.
And then I opened it up and went, "Ah, very, very clever." Yeah. So we'll judge the book by this cover because it's very, very good. So why don't you give us the little overview, and we don't do spoilers, so I know it can be hard to talk about book one and then go to book two, but you've done a great job so far. Give us a little overview of Lay and the Invisible Island.
So for Lay and the Invisible Island, she ends up um something gets lost in book 1 that is incredibly important to her best friend, and without it, her best friend would rot and turn miserable. So book 2 is all about Lay trying to get that item back and right the wrongs that she caused in book 1, and more than that, she has to learn not only how to apologize and, um, make up for her mistakes in that way, but also how to learn forgiveness for herself, because her own guilt and feeling badness ends up messing with her and eating at her. So it's a lot of learning that she is human, mistakes will happen, it's okay, you fix it, you apologize, you move on, and you work to make it right.
Yeah. Which is something that all of us can always use, whether we are a middle grade reader or an adult reader. That theme of forgiveness, but especially that self forgiveness.
Yeah.
I really was in awe of how you managed to bring a theme like that to the forefront while also having these amazingly cool adventures, right? It just wasn't this action-packed, really, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What is the unexpected that's coming on the next page? But it was also this deeper theme of forgiveness, of friendship, that was such a beautiful balance. And it made me wonder when you started writing, maybe it's both of these books, but when you started to realize you were going to put a book in its form so that your son would be able to see it. Which I guess, how do I want to ask the question? How did you do both? How did you manage to have that, um, Hawaiian-based adventure with these themes that any child will be able to relate to in real life.
I really like plot. I am a very plot heavy person. I really like the adventure. That's kind of what first comes to me where I'm first drawn. And then it is I have to hand it to my editor, Elizabeth Lee. She is phenomenal at poking and prodding me until I figure out what that theme is that I'm trying to convey.
Mm.
And a lot of times I don't even recognize what it is until many drafts down the road where I'm like, okay, now I see what I'm trying to do here. But it's definitely plot first, theme second, and theme maybe even fourth or fifth, because that takes me a while. And I really appreciate my editor helping me get there eventually.
Yeah. So are you the kind of author, this fascinates me as well, that when you write, you don't really know what's going to come next and you're just writing to find out? Or do you have kind of an end in mind and just write your way there somehow?
Well, Lay and the Fire Goddess was my first middle grade book that I've ever written. So I didn't know much about plotting when I started that book. I had a general idea of the plot that I wanted to have happen. And then I just started writing it and would literally go on I would get stuck and not know what was gonna happen next, so I would go on a run and get an idea for what would happen next and come back and write it. So I was writing it through, and that one went through 2 years of revisions and grew from my original finished product was about 50,000 words when I sent it to agents, and then 60,000 when I said it when I went on sub to publishers, and then it bumped up to 80,000 after the editing process with Elizabeth, and we filled in a lot of gaps and, um, those missing theme pieces to make it a much more cohesive three-dimensional story with a character that you could identify with more. On Lay 2, The Invisible Island, I had a much better understanding of how to streamline the process a little bit more and what was needed to make a story. I don't have a writing background. I have a degree in civil engineering and I was in real estate for a long time, so I really was learning this as I went. So book 2 was much easier and more cohesive to get a first draft down, and I definitely plotted that one better from the first go round, thanks to I had Alan Grant and Andrea Wang as mentors when I was writing book one, and they helped me understand the process of plotting and planning. So, yeah,
Yeah. So all the lessons learned from book 1 funneled into book 2
into book two.
and made
Yep.
it a different process. Yeah,
Yep.
the same happens, I think, for readers. When I would work with young children, I work with teachers now, teaching teachers how to help kids learn how to read and to use children's literature. But when I worked with students, my most favorite students to work with were those that either experienced difficulty learning literacy and hadn't figured out how wonderful it was yet, or those that were reluctant readers. Because I loved being the one that could unlock
Yes.
that whole world of reading. And that's why I loved series books, even if it was just 2 books like this or longer, because they put in that effort, right? Book 1, they're learning, they're figuring out the characters, what happens. But then if they can go to a second book, they know the characters. They've got a gist of what's coming, and it makes reading and understanding and getting lost in that second book easier. And so I love hearing that that is pretty much the same thing from the writing perspective as well as the readers.
And the feedback that I've received from folks who have read both book one and book two have they've let me know that they can tell that book 2 is actually better. It's a little bit more robust. It feels, um, more immersive to them, and they've enjoyed it more than book 1. So I'm like, "Well, great. You don't usually hear that for a sequel, right? So I'll
Right.
take."
Right. It can be hard. You're right to kind of match the level of someone else's expectation or experience of number one, whether it's a book or a movie. Um, you know what? When you say that, I love book one, but I also think I love book two a little bit more. But I felt that was because I already had the world in my head. Like I was like, "Oop, we're going back." And I love how the book starts, which is, this continuation of, okay, like book one just ended. Here we go. So I felt like, okay, I'm going to hit the ground running. I've got this. And I just love when books allow readers to be able to do that from book to book to book. There's one thing in the second book. And I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to give away spoilers, but I do have to tell you, and I know you'll be able to figure out the part. But my favorite part of the book, I think my favorite lesson of the book, and I think it's because it's the lesson that me, Stephanie, this adult, this mom, needs right now, comes at the end where someone understands what they need and what they want from a family member and has the guts and the courage to say it. And the family members listen in a way that just made my heart grow 3 sizes too big. That moment, and again, listeners, I know I'm being cagey, I'm doing it on purpose, but I want you to know that throughout the book, there are those moments, the moments where you're lost in a good way in another world, the moments where you get those kind of mic drop lessons about forgiveness of others and yourself, but there's these other moments that depending on what reader you are and where you are in your life, you just take that lesson or that theme and it just knocks you in the heart. And that one, Malia, knocked me in the heart. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a way to end. It was beautiful. I had to tell you how much this mom needed that lesson.
Yeah, this mom did too. Very much. I know what you're talking about, and yes, I try to take that to heart as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, listeners, this book is for middle grade readers, but it is also for adults so many reasons. We did that pretty well, not giving it away, yet still knowing exactly
Yeah,
what we're talking about.
definitely.
So, I know this book just published a little while ago, but are you working on the next step? Is there a third book or is there another book? What might be coming next?
So I have I'm working on another book in the pipeline. We will see where it ends up going. There is no announcement to be made yet, but it is not in the lay realm. It is a different Hawaiian legend story. It will take place in Hawaii. It will deal with a boy main character who is really struggling with impulse issues. I have ADHD, and so that's really close to home. And he also might turn into a shark every now and again. So that's an impulse he has to learn how to control to figure out how to live in the world. So, yeah, that's kind of what I'm working on. We'll see where it goes. There's no big anything yet, but we're stepping away from lay for now.
So I love this because you said, someone that didn't write, you were real estate, an engineer, and now Book 1, check. Book 2, check. Working on book 3, like, yeah, you are a writer. This is just really cool to see. We can do it if we want. We can switch gears. You can write, and I just love that this is your new direction. It's clearly what you were meant for, at least in my opinion, after reading your books. I don't know how good of a real estate agent you were, but you're a really wonderful children's literature author.
That's awesome, and I love telling kids that I go to visit that life is really long and you don't have to have it all planned out or sorted even when you're a teenager, even when you're like a so-called adult. You can try a lot of different things and you don't have to know what you wanna be when you grow up, even when you grow up.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Even when you grow up. That is so true. So you do school visits. You mentioned school
I do.
visits in person,
Yes.
virtual. Tell listeners.
Yep, if any folks are interested, they can go to my website, maliamaunakea.com, and under the contact tab, there's a form to fill out. Just let me know and I'll send you all of the options. But yes, I do virtual, I do in person. I have a whole menu of presentation options from elementary through high school, depending on what age range you're looking to get into. Um, yeah, I would love to come and chat with the people in your life.
It's always so special when and I'm lucky because I get to do this right now on a podcast, but I remember as a child when you get to meet an author, right? It is a big deal. It puts your enthusiasm for reading and writing in a whole nother category when you get to experience that. And I know that a lot of visits were impacted by the pandemic, and it is so nice to see authors are really getting back out there and in classrooms. Yet the virtual still didn't go away. So it's kind of the best of both worlds now that we can do that to get even closer to authors like you.
It really is. I never had an author visit. I mean, being from Hawaii, and I was on Hawaii Island, which is like a super country little island that nobody came out to visit us. So I really do try. I want to hit as many kids as possible, not just in Hawaii, but all over to share this world and those stories, with them and teach the science and the um not social studies, but the cultural piece about Hawaii so they get a peek behind the tourist heavy postcard of the island and the people that live there.
So you mentioned your website. Is there
Yes.
anywhere, any social media, any other links you'd like to share so listeners can find out more about you, find your books, all the things?
Yeah, I'm not the greatest at social media or newsletters, but you can subscribe to my newsletter on my website by filling in the contact form. And then I am on Instagram most reliably, I'd say, at Malia Maunakea. I also am on X, formerly, what is that, Twitter,
Yeah.
but barely at Malia Maunakea. I'm on Facebook at Malia Maunakea Writes, barely. Like, yeah, I'm there. You can find me.
Yeah. I'll make sure to put links to all of those places. And I know how hard it can be to show up in all of those places at
Yeah.
once. We'll put Instagram at the top since you said that was
Instagram,
the most
yes.
reliable.
Best bet, Instagram for sure.
Okay. I'll add your website, those social links, and of course, links to both of the books so that listeners can click on them. You look at that cover, make sure you look
Yes.
at the cover, and then grab
And
it.
if it helps listeners to know, there's pronunciations, recorded pronunciations of the Hawaiian words from book 1 on my website. So if you're reading through and you just have questions on how to pronounce some of these more frequent Hawaiian words, go through there. There's also audiobooks I've been recommending for a lot of younger readers, especially if you want. Playing the audiobook while you're reading along can be a good way to get your ear used to hearing the intonations and the flow and the cadence of the Hawaiian words. Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I didn't find that until after book 1. I was in the middle of book 2, but when I did, it just made the experience so much better because then I was really immersing myself and knowing correctly, what was in my head versus what I heard. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. That is such a great resource. That is such a good companion to the book. Thank you so much for coming on today and talking about both of these books. I'm thrilled to be part of kind of your team to put them out of the world with teachers, librarians, educators. And I know once they see it and they just get lost in that story like I did, you're going to have fans of this series for sure. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been fun.
Ah, and listeners, thank you, of course, for listening to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.